Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Lore You Know. I think my mic is on. Yes, my mic is on. Excellent.
I can hear you.
Right? We are talking about, having covered the landmass of Gelspad, which is the main lore
This is the map behind
continent,
me.
right?
Yeah.
We then did the Blood Sea, which is the very large body of water that is tainted with the
Let's see
blood of
why.
a titan off to
It's
the
that way.
east of the continent. We are going to skip Termana for now because there is hope that Termana will come to the Slarian Vault in the near future, but we're not 100% sure on that. But it seems to make sense that it makes more sense to talk about that as we are actually able to dive into it. So we're going to
Exactly.
go to the continent of Asherak, which is actually really interesting that it's like the birthplace of the gods of divine worship, and we'll get into that. But it's also for those of you who are really into Dark Sun. I feel like this is a good, I feel like Scoured Lands in general is a really good sidestep from that if you want something for fifth edition. But hopefully we'll get an Asherak 5e at some point because I feel like it's a good analog to Dark Sun where it's like this fucking wasteland of a continent.
Yes.
And
Oh
it
my
never
god.
used to be, much like Dark Sun.
No.
It never was, but
Well, there
it
was a little
became
desert, but
that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
But it
yeah.
kind of had this like oasis feel to it, and then, you know,
Stuff
shit
happens.
happened, right? So,
As it
hello,
goes.
Sarah. How
Hello,
goes?
Jeremy. Oh wow, it goes. I have gotten the first jab. I've gotten my
Oh,
first shot COVID
congratulations!
vaccine. So second one is coming soon. I could not. So I couldn't do. I could only do this.
Right?
And then I could do this, but I couldn't go any higher than that. So it was like first day was this and second day was this. So,
Awesome.
but there you go. So first one's down. Second one's still to go, where I'm allowed to be a person again and leave my house to do something other than get the mail.
Huzzah! And
Seriously,
hopefully
that's
we will all be leaving our houses soon, returning to the sun,
I I
remembering the
do go to the
before time.
backyard, so I do go see the sun, but I don't like leave my neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like I have to leave the perimeter of my domain because I hate wearing a mask. So I will
Yeah,
wear them. I do wear them. I do wear them. But as a result, I don't go anywhere.
right. Yeah, my gaming group keeps saying, "Well, I just got my first shot. What are we going to get back together in person?" And I'm like, "What is that going to look like?
Like, yeah,
I don't even
I've been
remember what
doing
you look
these
like from, here
here
down."
down. Yeah,
You
well, they'll discover that I have not been wearing pants for a year.
right? I mean, I've got
Oh
my
my god!
my PJ bottoms on, so I don't remember the
Me
last time I
too.
streamed with. Actually, no, I have
I
done
can't
one
live my life
stream
in
in the
that.
last month with jeans on, so
I am actually wearing brand new Jack Skellington Disney leggings.
nice, good
So
choice, good call.
I have like 8 pairs of Disney leggings now. So there you go. Anyway, we're
The
way off
new
topic.
work pants,
Yeah, Disney owns everything. Uh
including your soul. I
oh,
mean,
I have a tattoo. It's the whole thing. Uh anyway, Scardlands. We're here to
yeah.
talk about Scardlands. Oh, first we have to talk about coffee.
Oh yeah, I could throw out a link here. So feel free if you are a coffee fan as much as I am, stop by. Looking
That
for the
place.
link for where's my link? Where's my link? Found familiar
We
coffee. There it is.
we have a sponsor.
And use the code WHPubs for 10% off. Trust me, it is totally worth it. If I were you, I would get Hex. Or what was the other one I really, really liked? Actually, I don't know if they make Campaign Cartographer anymore. So definitely Hex. Do Hex.
All right, all right.
Okay.
Neat. Okay,
Spiel.
so spiel. Oh, so Asherak. So we talked about we've touched on this before. We've mentioned this continent
Yeah.
several times because you kind of have to.
Well, and it
And
appears in like many of the books. There's mention of it, and they're like, "Hey, this monster comes from there, and this history happened there." But it didn't appear until the
the
last
last
book,
book
which was
and
called Strange
Strange
Lands. Yeah.
Lands, Lost Tribes of the Scardlands, and the very last book that came out in 2004. I'm going to mention these two guys. I've mentioned them so many times. Joe Karkar and Armel, who are who at this point were the guys, the lead developers, pretty much. And they are the two names as the developers on this book. But the author's credit is more authors than any other Scoured Lands book for the original era, I should say.
Yeah.
And it's a massive amount of people who worked on this thing. And it was like all the ideas, all of the remaining all of the holes of things that they introduced in previous books that they kind of but we didn't include this prestige class that we should have because we mentioned it a billion times, or this god or that god, and all of it got dumped into this one book. Absolutely, which is really 4 books in almost 5 books in a way.
Yeah,
there's the three additional continents: Asherak, the Dragonlands, and Fenrirlink, and we've done episodes already on the Dragonlands and Fenrirlink. And then there was basically another creature collection.
Yeah.
It was basically Creature Collection 4, effectively. And then finally, the Appendixes, which are almost a book in themselves because they add another bunch of gods to the pantheon, almost demigods, and a bunch of spells and a bunch of magic items, yet more prestige classes that fell outside of these 3 new continents. So each of these continents have their own spells, their own creatures, their own magic items, their own whatever. And then here's even more. So this book was basically a taking all of those other taking concepts from Relics and Rituals and Divine and Defeated and campaign setting books and all that stuff and just mushing it into one mega volume.
Right.
But as a result, things are very condensed.
Yeah.
Really condensed. So you don't, despite there being, each Galespad was this massive volume of the same size. Termana is this massive volume of the same size. This is massive volume, 3 continents, and all this other stuff. So it's not a lot about these 3 continents compared to
totally.
The first 2.
I feel like it was the seeds they had already built that they were going to continue on with, but this was kind of the end. So they were like, we're gonna give you this, and you can go from there.
Yeah, and in his introduction, Joe says this is the final book of the Scoured Lands line. They were wrong. And I'm so glad they were wrong. But there was the final book of the Scoured Lands 3X line. No question.
Yeah.
So there was one 4th edition creature collection conversion that I have never read.
Wow, I don't think I even have seen that before.
I have never seen it. I've heard that it exists. I have never actually seen it. And then we have all the stuff that we've talked about and 5e, which is still growing in a wonderful way. So
and there's a Pathfinder book.
And there's a Pathfinder. There's a couple Pathfinder books too. Yeah. I wish there was more Pathfinder books, honestly. But the nice thing is it's elite. It's a lot easier to convert these old materials to at least 1st edition Pathfinder than to 5e.
Yeah. It's definitely. I mean, 1st edition Pathfinder was essentially like D&D 3.75. Yeah. So there was not a huge step. There wasn't much confusion. No. It was pretty easy. Yeah.
It turned flying into a skill. Yeah. And some other stuff. But yeah, and linguistics. I loved linguistics. But yeah, so Asherak. This is homeland of this is where it all began. I mean, this is where the system began, but this is where Skarn began. And this continent is and this is the whole, how big is this planet of Skarn? You keep going east from Galespad, you cross the Blood Sea, go beyond the edge of where the blood is into normal sea, and eventually reach this continent. And this continent is the home of where they claim, and this is mythological lore, and is this the truth? Up to the GM to decide, I suppose. They claim this is where the Titans were born. So from my perspective, this is where the spirits that became the Titans emerged before they decided to go nom on the moon. This is where the gods were born.
Yeah.
And before the gods were born, this is where the Titans made the very first of what were later dubbed the divine races.
Right.
Specifically humans, elves, and dwarves originated on this continent and then dispersed in the great diaspora of humanity and elvanity and dwarfanity It sounds like profanity.
Right.
But
Well, I mean, you know, stereotypical dwarves are
I
want to
suppose,
be
yes.
profane, so
So this is where all of those things were born. Not where I don't know where the hell halflings came from, but those three races, plus all this other all these other things were born in Asherak, and then they were like, yeah, this place sucks, and traveled across the sea. So kind of wild there. And and the center of this continent is this massive pillar called that they call Mount Nemul now. What the Titans called it back in the day, who knows? And it's just the middle of the continent, and it's like a freaking what do they call it? A space elevator to the heavens almost. It doesn't necessarily reach. Suffice to say, the atmosphere is thin at the top. We're talking like you need a thing, like Everest levels of higher or higher. It's massively high, and it's considered absolutely sacred because everything kind of came out of this pillar that they now call Nemul. And it was here that apparently the Titans emerged, and then Cata went around and I'm going to make continents and land, and then Gormoth is like, I'm going to make life and plants and animals and stuff. And then Gulthane was like, and I'm going to give those life souls so they can live forever like us. And then all the other Titans were like, they weren't supposed to live forever like us, and then beat them up. So like this was sort of the source of that. And then eventually civilization and all the various epochs. So what they say about Asherak, and this is, again, super condensed, is that there isn't a lot of history prior to the epoch of certainly Gulaben, of the Ice Age that we've talked about. So the Ice Age did hit Asherak. Then there's like ruins and vague hand waves. It's clear that there's no mention of the Slorasians in any of this lore, so I don't think the Slorasian Empire reached Asherak, or if it did, it didn't have the big giant influence that it has in Termana and Gelspad, particularly Gelspad. And there isn't, and you'd think that this being the birthplace, there'd be so much history, but it's been so ravaged over the millennia that the history is really utterly lost.
I like to think about it like, so, Gelspad is there's so many empires that have fallen in Gelspad, but before those empires were even like a twinkling in a grandfather's eye, over in Asherak there were empires already going, but those empires got ground down by the epochs that almost nothing exists. But it is such like, if you need an even older area to go to in your campaign, that's it. Like somewhere under the earth, there are remnants of something that hasn't even been made into like, a book, because they essentially hand waved, like you said. They were like, prior to that epoch, who knows what the hell happened?
Who knows what the hell happened? Yeah. So they talk about, in terms of like the end of the epoch of Frinruk, which is only, that's not that long ago on the metric scale of the ridiculousness of the Scoured Lands timeline. But so we're looking back like 1,000 years, 2,000 years, I guess. There were they mentioned three kingdoms that kind of ruled Asherak, and this is before the gods had a foothold. And they were basically a kingdom in the south called the Kingdom of Amthras. And then there was there's a seagoing nation and all that. So three kind of kingdoms / empires ruled the continent. And this continent is about was at the time, I should say, was at the time about the size of Gelspad, but like Gelspad flipped. So Gelspad is kind of short and long. Asherak is narrow and tall. But in terms of square miles, oh no, I lie. It's probably about half the size of. Well, no, yeah, no, that's about right. It's about 1,000. It was about a little over 1,000 miles wide and 3,000 miles long, tall. So kind of flipped. And with Mount Nemul dominating the middle of it, with this big, huge, hundreds of leagues wide mountain range that basically cut the continent in half, which cuts everything in half, because the only really way to get around, because the pass through this mountain range, which is brutal, would have been by ship. So not a lot of, two halves of the continent almost separate in terms of development and culture and everything like that. And plus you had more mountain ranges above and below those, which weren't as big but existed. So development was weird there. And then and there was this council though, in the Sky Pillar Mountains, which is the mountains that are along Mount Nemul, that were sort of there was this Druid Council that sort of ran the show. So all these kingdoms were there, and they were just like, and you will come to us about anything religious, and we will tell you how to work. And they work behind the scenes to kind of like help peace treaties and communications and things like that. But they didn't interfere. We don't interfere. Your internal things are your internal things, unless you break the Druid law, and then we'll go beat you up. And they were like the center of all of that, of religion, and because there were no gods yet. Then the Titans were like called to the way they describe it is called to their nature. They had to do this. They had no choice. They had to, just like they had to make life and move continents around, they had to make the babies. And Churn, Lethina, and Thulkas went to Mount Nemul. Like, I don't know what happened. I just picture the three of them showing up going, you're here too. I feel this urge to do something. I don't know what it is. And I can't imagine Churn making anything, yet he's like the first Titan to do this. And the three of them, in this kind of weird polyandrous thing, decided to mingle their essences. I don't know what that means, but you can picture that. Only one Lady Titan, but there was a Lady Titan. Mingle their essences and make a thing that they called Vangal. Is Vangal a god? They say Vangal's the first god. Vangal's also the weirdest god because he doesn't get power the way gods do. He's funky. And the only god to have the only god in canon to have three parental Titan parents. And then, but then after that, a whole bunch of Titans went to Mount Nemul and made their own. Like, I'm going to make some, and I'm going to make twins, twice. And proceeded to make another 11 gods, I think 11 gods total. 8, 9, 10. Yeah. So 11 gods were made this way. At least 11 gods were made this way. Including, quote, the big 8. And then the gods did their thing and got beaten up by their parents for the most part and were very unhappy. So they were drawn to these divine planes and ended up basically getting sucked into their respective heavens and hells and afterlives and couldn't get out. And were sort of stuck there, but at least not getting beaten up by their parents anymore. And then this happened. An oracle child in Asherak named Zakimi, who was a descendant of an oracular line of spellcasters in the big it doesn't even actually say where she's from, of the Rishaka people who aren't mentioned in the history anywhere, but there you go. So she started speaking like weird things, like speaking in tongues, so to speak. But she was saying these names, and everybody's like, "What is she doing? She's gone crazy. Strange child. Send her away to the people who can fix her." And they sort of kicked her out of town. Like, go talk to the weird people in the mountains. They'll know what to do with you. and she eventually finds this master, this teacher, who's like, "Let's find out what it is you're doing." And realized that she was naming, she was getting like messages from another dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And she made an alliance with this master who kind of knew how to do magic, and they started studying magic and studying how you can basically talk to things in other dimensions. And this is there was stuff about talking in other dimensions at this point because people had summoned Jinn in other places and dealing with elementals and stuff like that. So it wasn't unheard of. But these dimensions were new. This wasn't the elemental plane of fire. This was something that nobody understood yet. Like, this is a weird dimension. We don't understand where this comes from. And eventually they realized these are these uber powerful beings, and the uber powerful beings were saying, if you pray to us, we can give you power.
Yeah.
And they were like, cool. And Zakimi ended up having a bunch of descendants, and among them were 8 prophets, which I question that as like, why wasn't there a prophet to like Ercanthus? And
it was
yeah.
rather on the nose for the 8 victors, wasn't it?
Yeah, rather on the nose, which makes me say, well, the victors write the history books, so
Right,
why
right.
wasn't there a prophet for Ercanthus? Okay, or any of the other demigods? We know Nathos and Gendavius did their own thing, so they didn't go to heavens and everything. But like, what was going on here? But anyway, I think this was the heart of why these 8 gods became the victor gods, is because they had this thing in common. And because of their just cementing their presence in Asherak like this.
Right. It was like, to me,
yeah.
it was like a power boost. They were like, Asherak was like the battery for each of them, that they got that extra. And like, we'll talk about how that kind of like almost got broken, but I feel like it really was that like extra thing that caused them to be just powerful enough to be the 8 victor gods.
To be the uber gods, and
Right.
not, and why all of the other gods are demigods or alternatively weird, but
Right.
what makes the 8 victors the big 8? And because I think it is because of this, because they had these prophets, these first initial 8 prophets who would, and what these prophets did, these children of Zakimi, or grandchildren or whoever, wandered Asherak and basically just told everybody about the awesomeness of praying to a god.
Right.
And as opposed to being a druid. And as druids were, druid power is mercurial. You don't know what's going to happen. It's like, well, maybe Mormo will bless me with abilities, or maybe she'll just eat me. And well, you can kind of say that about Vangal. Most of the gods were like, no, if you pray to me, I'll give you power.
Yeah.
And unlike druids, who are like kind of stomp around and like no armor because of the way magic worked, clerics could stomp around in plate mail.
Right.
Which
had to be terrifying for like, the soldiers and everything going up against armies like that. They're just like, oh, we can. What the hell is that? Why are they what? The,
yeah, because prior to clerics, it was like you had. And remember, there's no paladins either. So prior to clerics and paladins, it was like the guys in the armor couldn't do magic. They were in the front, and the guys who could do magic were in the back, and they were in like robes, or furs, or something. They weren't in armor. The druids kind of wore a little bit of armor, but not to they weren't in plate mail. Right. And you had suddenly these spellcasters who could heal.
Yeah.
Running around the continent, and everybody's like, this is awesome. I have this disease. And they're like, blumph, you are cured. Wow. And so they had a really good claim on getting followers in a way that the druids and whatnot didn't. So the big war, druids and the clerics and the druids basically kind of fought it out. And over time, the clerics won. And basically in Asherak, and chased out virtually all Titan worship on this continent over the course of the next chunk of time. So the Titans weren't really welcome here anymore. And the gods really started protecting Asherak in a way that they don't protect the other continents. Certainly not for Gelspad
right.
and Termana. Dragonlance had the dragons; they didn't need protection, and Fenrir, nobody gave a shit about. But this is a cold place; no one goes there. So you had this, but in the middle of it was Mount Nemul, and that's where the gods, the Titans used this to give birth to the gods, but the gods also considered this their kind of meeting place, sacred place. They would meet there to talk to each other because it was neutral territory. It's a place where Enkili and Hadrada could get together without coming to blows, or Madriel and Belsamith could get together. They could do that here in this very neutral place, a very, very magical place. And that's where they would meet and start going, my dad beats me up. So does mine. And they started coming up. And it was less about that and more about they're starting to screw with the people who worship us. They've always been screwing with the people who worship us, and this is a problem. We have to do something about it. And the official, this is fun, the official history, i.e. what the common people know, is that the gods were planning to go to war, and then the Titans showed up in Asherak and did something horrible that caused massive waves of destruction, possibly when the gods killed Mesos, or when whatever happened, and Asherak just becomes this devastation. That's what most people, 99 point something percent of the population believe. And then there's the few who know the truth. And this is a big secret, because the gods fear that if people found out the truth, that they would stop worshiping them, because this was the most horrible thing that ever happened. They decided to build a thing. Basically, Corian came up with this idea. The Titans are tied to Skarn. What if we severed that connection? They would be vulnerable, and we could basically overthrow them. So they did all this research to build this thing with the intent of separating the Titans from Skarn. And this thing, which they called the Seraphic Engine, which was contributed to by all the gods, all the major gods put effort into this. Demigods helped. I in my own kind of headcanon, I imagined like they even got like mortals to come, like you're an engineer, get over here and put this piece on this, and then like whoever they could get to come and help build this thing.
And I like how it talks about how it's actually multi-dimensional.
Yeah.
So like it exists on multiple planes. So across the planes, they had different, pieces of it built, and when it aligned, it was like this thing.
Yeah.
Like on the prime material on actual Asherak, it was like about the size of a large forge.
Yeah. But
like,
it's really the size of a castle.
Right.
yeah, it's massive.
Yeah.
And because you've got pieces of it, astral plane and the positive energy plane, or whatever you're going to call it, and all of the different things just connecting this thing. And then all of the gods just shove a lot of energy into it, like I am focusing my, spell slots or whatever,
right.
putting energy into it, however you want to put it. And all of the people are like, yeah, okay, gather the prayers of people from far away. And they also evacuated the region just in case.
Yeah.
Like everybody who was on Mount Nemul, who's not a god, scamper. You might want to not be here for this. Which
and I like how it does say that because of what happened. Like they knew something might go wrong, but I don't think they understood how fucking horrifically it was going to go wrong.
So they flipped. I can just picture Corian standing there like, I'm gonna flip the switch now.
Right.
And for an eye blink, this thing ran and then exploded.
Yeah. Or it didn't explode. It did what it was supposed to do. It was just not what they expected.
No, for just a half a second, and then this effect rippled across all of the world, but mostly across all of Asherak. Went straight down the mountain, basically sheared the sides off of Mount Nemul, going thousands of feet under the mountain range, well below sea level, creating this like pit below the mountain, and up in I'm assuming like atmospheric disturbance going up that knocked the stars out of the sky.
Yeah.
And basically all the zodiac things fell, and then across to just shatter the landscape of Asherak, all the way up and beyond the mountain ranges that were on the other edge of the continent, destroying everything. Like oceans poured in as just land collapsed, and like that huge, massive, hundreds of leagues long mountain range, 4/5 of it just shattered and were destroyed and fell into the ocean. And millions of people died, and it destroyed those kingdoms that I mentioned, just annihilated them.
I think it's interesting because it gets into a metaphysical level too, because they're talking about how it destroys all this land and everything, but when it killed the people, it didn't just kill them, because at this point, like, their souls were going on to these divine planes. It destroyed these people's souls, like it burned them from existence. So they didn't get to go on afterwards. They weren't like, okay, well, I died, but I went ahead and went to Madriel's realm. They were just gone. They don't get to get reborn like they used to. Gone.
So it was horrific. And
Yeah.
of course, even the selfish gods were like, I just lost a lot of my power because A, I put a bunch of power into this thing, but B, a bunch of my followers just died. And I
Right.
don't even get the benefit of them going to my afterlife. They are gone. And and then in an instant, as they were just like, holy shit, what happened? A whole bunch of the gods were like, we have to help the survivors. So they kind of spread all over Asherak and were like, it's like, you are hiding behind a mountain. Let's keep you from exploding,
Right.
And they ran all over the place. Demigods like spread out, and several gods died in the explosion too. Like they suspect at least 2 gods completely were annihilated in this explosion, demigods. And this isn't how Arcanthus fell. He was already dead by this point, but I think this is the real why they killed Arcanthus, just to flip the switch, because he was like, this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. don't do this. And the evil gods were like, nope, kill him. Now we're gonna flip the switch. And then the other thing was that the Titans were like, what did you just do? And I totally imagine like the gods going, okay, demigods, go help the people. All right, we've got to fix this. And Mesos just popping in going, what the fuck just happened? And then the 8 victor gods like, kill him, and then just taking out
Right.
Mesos. That's the way I picture the sequence of events.
Right. And I think it's interesting because, okay, so we've talked before in previous episodes about how the Titans can't die. And so, like they were defeated and they were maybe chopped up, but they still survive. This almost lends credence to the fact that the gods were like, we can't kill them. Like, not that it's not possible, but if we separated their existence from Skarn and it did this, if we actually killed them, what would happen? And so I feel like the effort to really kill the Titans was never put forth because they knew they shouldn't, I guess you could say. That maybe it really is possible to kill a Titan, like, end them completely, but that's a really bad idea because look what happened.
And the one Titan they do kill, Galthane, they kill him he gets absorbed into Deneb, becomes part of another Titan.
So technically that essence is still there.
It's still there. Yeah. And presumably that gives her the ability to do what he could do, so she can now make souls and stuff, which was his shtick.
Yeah.
So it's wild. It's absolutely wild. And so the gods felt really shitty about this, and even all of them, and they were like, we have to. The few survivors on Asherak, mostly people on the edges who were behind like the secondary mountain ranges, the demigods and gods went out and tried to keep them from dying, and then felt so shitty about it that they were like, we will give you everything we can for you to rebuild civilization on Asherak. So it is not a complete and utter wasteland. And so the gods came up with a kind of fast plan. And meanwhile, setting up to start fighting the Divine War. So all of the stuff that later happens in Gelsbad and those areas start kicking up. But at this point, they've only really probably defeated Mesos. And maybe, if that was like an immediate fallout of flipping this switch on the Seraphic Engine. And by the way, the Seraphic Engine, like, is it lost?
Right. It disappeared.
Yeah, it disappeared.
So you could be like, oh, it exploded and it's gone. Or part of the book is like, it's buried somewhere in the desert and I want to find it, but I don't want to find it.
Could someone rebuild this thing?
Right.
And go to all the different dimensions and be like, here's the lug nut over on the astral plane. Here's this circuit board over in the elemental plane of fire. Build, I don't know.
Right.
Conceivably, if you're god level and you really know what you're doing, or maybe if you're, I don't know, the Uthriac.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of the Uthriac and the Saracens, so from chat there is an interesting interpretation of what happened. Perhaps the Saracen seed that's in Drendari's mind partially awakened and sabotaged the project. So I have feels about this because could that be a thing? Yes, but like the Uthriac were like, I want out of this reality that you call existence. And so to me, it seems like if it was sabotage by this like seed that was in Drindari's mind, it was less like about sabotage and more like leaning into, I want to make this work for the Uthriac and not the Titans. But that doesn't, I mean, you could then say that that force, you know, wasn't correct and it threw off the equations that they had to build this with. And so the energies released is what destroyed everything and burned away the souls. Could that work? If that's what you need for it to be in your game? Absolutely.
It
I could see
how
the
do I
Uthriac totally sitting there and being like, I want this to work because then I can get out of here.
I will say this, it does not contradict my plans for Through Shadows and Dreams. Not saying that's what happened, but not saying that isn't what happened
Yeah.
in my headcanon at least.
And that you always have to take the books as, yes, they're canon, but yes, not all of them are necessarily what their intention was. Like,
And
this
also,
is what mortals understand.
yeah, and also they contradict themselves all over the place too.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Because you had like 50 writers and they're not all going to sync up. I mean, we contradicted things in Frostlands of Fenrilik in
Right?
our own book. Not a lot, but a little bit. Like, color is Frethy's hair. Yeah. We
Nice.
tried.
Right.
We tried. So yeah, it's tough. So could that have been the case? I don't know.
Yeah,
I
it's
honestly
totally
don't know, but
it's a viable thing, especially if you want to
viable,
run. If you wanted to run a campaign where the Sluritian presence that's still, you know, like those feels and those like emanations that are pushing people to do things. If you needed the Sluritians to try and make mortals find the pieces of the Seraphic Engine to try and free the Uthriac from this fucking terrible existence as they would view it.
would want, yeah.
That's a great storyline. I love it.
That is a great storyline, yeah. And I would, yeah. That is messed up.
Yeah.
Poor Drindari.
You know,
Yeah.
we don't care about the Uthriac. Don't care about these little souls. They're
Oh,
meaningless. I don't want
Yeah.
to feel this pain of hunger anymore. I don't want to have to eat to survive. Ugh.
Anyway, moving on. We don't have forever. So what the gods did to kind of be like, oh, we feel so bad,
Mhm.
is they sent their minions out to Asherak to be like, help them, because you know they're also dealing with wars and Mezzo
Right.
showing up, all this other stuff. So they're like, angels, devils, do your stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and they just sent all of their minions out to Asherak to just like, okay, you bunch of, you know, Madriel just sends a ton of angels over to this city to rescue people, and Chardoon sends a ton of devils over to that city to rescue people, and you just and they're just like, well, we don't, you know, whether they're being like, nice about it or just like, get in the boat. They're you know, doing their thing, and they're just, so angels and devils and demons and outsiders, as we like to call them, celestials and whatnot, were sent, and initially to just kind of help people, and the demigods were kind of doing their thing too. And then as things kind of, as the dust settled a little bit, and then these mortals were like, how do we survive? You've destroyed everything. You know, there's no potable water or plant life to eat. Thank goodness the ocean isn't made of blood.
Right.
Yeah. They various gods kind of who either, because it was an area they were already being worshipped because the gods were so strong already in this continent, or because it was like this happened to be the place that Chardoon's devils showed up at, and Chardoon went there. Various gods went to these little habits of humanity, and by human I mean dwarves and elves and humans, not
Right.
just
Humans.
mortality.
Something.
Yeah, they would, people, where the people are. The gods would go there and they'd pick a leader amongst the people and go, "You're a god king.
Yeah.
I bless you. You have power." And they'd choose a leader amongst each group of mortals in each community. And suddenly you had this immortal person who couldn't die of disease or poison, who didn't get age, or age to maturity, but that couldn't die of old age. Were robust and had cool magic abilities.
Yeah.
The neatest of which is they have this ability to expend in terms of the rule set, or in terms of particularly the 3X rule set. They would expend what would be effectively a spell slot to imbue all clerics of their god in a 60-mile radius. Is it really that big? Massive.
It was pretty big, yeah.
No, 3-mile radius. I've exaggerated a little bit. 3-mile radius. 3-mile radius. Okay. Oof, not that big. I don't know where 60 came from. In a 3-mile radius, all clerics in a 3-mile radius suddenly, as though they had all their spell slots back or were refreshed as completed. I'm doing this in 5e rules, but as basically could cast all their spells again for the day. So, and could determine what those spell slots would be.
Yeah.
So, say there's a forest fire. The God King would be like, I need all of my clerics to have all of the create waters. And and it can only just once a day, so they can't like spend every single spell slot to keep regenerating it. But once a day, they can be like, boom, you all have all of the create waters, go. And suddenly the clerics are just like, okay, we're making it rain then, are we? And let's put out that forest fire. So, yeah, so these individuals imbued with this power, really badass. But they could be slain. So you could still, if you were badass enough, to kill a 20th level, actually 20th level spellcaster plus.
Yeah.
Because the other.
I was just saying, it's suggested in 3E that they were CR, like the 8 Victor Gods ones would be like CR 30.
Yeah.
Which isn't like of the 5th edition stuff that like makes me sad. It's like the reduction in power. Like gods should be like CR 30 and above, and they and that's not the way that it works. But if I were to make these, I would still keep them CR 25 to CR 30. They are amazing.
Yeah.
Beings.
Like even the demigod ones are like CR 24.
Right.
They're not in the 3X. So yeah, these would, and there's a bunch of these guys. There isn't like 2 or 3 God Kings. There aren't hundreds, but they're, in the solid double digits that they made these guys. Most of the gods made like half a dozen of these guys. So
just like in the, I can't remember which mountain range, just like Vangal has like 3 of them like right there, and they don't get along.
Sisters mountains.
Yeah.
There's 3 of these God Kings.
And I mean that's just Vangal right there, and he's got others elsewhere, but yeah.
So they all of the 8 victors and a couple of the demigods make God Kings too. So they've got all these, and they are basically there to protect the people. So there's that craziness going on. Before we get into the lands, I'm gonna kind of go in the order that I have prepared. In addition to elves and dwarves and humans, in Asherak, as I said, there's no really any. There's certainly obviously no Manticora or anything. There's no halflings either, or gnomes or anything like that. Just those 3 were the main races. But there is a 4th major race that's found nowhere else, called the Ubantu.
Yeah.
They're sort of like halflings. Short, thin humanoids, basically. So size of a halfling, but skinnier. Minus the hairy feet, I suppose. They look really frail, and apparently Rinruk made them in the desert of On, which is the northern desert in Asherak, which was a desert prior to the Cataclysm. It was just like like the Urkrudin, not this the fucked up land that it is now. But it was the desert of On, and he made these little people so that he could run around and hunt them because he was an asshole.
I love how he essentially makes halflings to hunt. He's just like, hey, so you've got a slower move speed, and I'm a dick, so I'm gonna make you and go hunt you. Fucking Hinruk.
Yeah. So the kind of other major mortalish race were these little Ubuntu dudes who aren't really found anywhere else other than in Asherak. and so that's like the other race. And
Yeah.
then the last ones would be any celestial or fiendish races. If you're going to find Tiefling or Aasimar on Skarn, it's going to be an Asherak.
Yeah.
Not to say they couldn't leave Asherak and wander around the rest of the world, post-war, but all of these devils and demons they had running around helping people, they made the babies.
Yeah.
and these devils and demons and angels weren't just post-war. There wasn't just like, oh, the Seraphic Engine exploded and we sent out all our minions. They were already kind of not as much of them pre the war, but this continent was so focused on worshiping the gods that, while unusual, it wouldn't be unheard of for just an angel to show up,
Right.
and be like, I would help the king here, and do their thing, because the gods were so much more likely to visit in person or send a representative here in Asherak than they would be in Gelspad or Termana. And so, not unheard of for outsider, other dimensional being to
Like,
show
it even
up.
talks about, like, if a fiend or a celestial were to be like walking down the street, it's not a big deal. Like, they don't necessarily.
Well, it's a big deal, but it's not a big deal.
Right, like, they don't, like, walk up to it or get in its way, but, like, they just step to the side, let it pass, and they're like, okay, because it's such a normal sight to see on Asherak.
Yeah, you don't, and particularly after the engine went up, you saw, like, maybe a few. Now it's like they're all over the place. Not all over the place, but enough that basically enough, if on Gelspad, if an angel showed up, everybody in town would drop to their knees. This is like, oh, it's an angel. Step back, let them pass. Hi, don't hurt, and be nice and be polite. And it's more like that. It's like, it's the equivalent of seeing like a king go by, not of like, oh, it's the king. Oh, it's the angel. Let them go, or the demon or whatever. So the Aasimars and Tieflings could totally show up.
Absolutely.
Easily. They're not called out specifically in this book, but they would fit in incredibly well in Asherak.
And if you haven't seen it, Travis Legg has a great guide to Tieflings in the Scarred Lands setting. I'll go ahead and link that here in a moment, but it's a fantastic way of looking at Tieflings that go beyond like what Forgotten Realms looks at them, where they're just like, oh, you had sex with the devil. You know what I mean? Because outsiders are such a vast array of things, and so he's gone through and created a wide variety of Tieflings. So I'll link that here in a sec.
Yeah, because Scarred Lands also has more than just demons and devils. There's daemons, but there's also the what do the neutral, what do Unkali and Hadrada have for their minions? So we call them fiendish and celestial, but there's just more than.
That's another loss from 3rd edition to 5th edition, where there's no more outsider. It's like, and it was such a great catch-all for a lot of things.
And so outsiders would be running around. So I imagine whatever Hadrada's celestial things are, I don't even know. Very, very stoic winged creatures with no facial expression whatsoever. Anyway, so they're there. So shall I shift gears to the map?
Sure. There's one other thing I was just going to throw out there real quick. There, in all of the entries, it talks about why would you run into these creatures elsewhere. So like the Ubuntu, you technically can find them elsewhere, but they're almost never going to be called Ubuntu. Like, they are rejects. They're people who have been exiled for crimes or things against their people. The Ubuntu are like super, we have to live in the Crucible and prove ourselves to our god and all of that. So is it possible? Yes. What's that?
Yeah, they're adamant followers of Hadrada.
Right.
They're just like,
and so, like, if you run into an Ubuntu that's outside of Asherak, really outside of, like, the Crucible, too. Like, I'm sure they go out for trade, but, like, living in the Crucible is their life. That's why, because they were kicked out. And they're actually part of the Scarred Races book that's on drive-through RPG, and when I was doing it, I had to change their name because they were like, "These are from the Asherak things, and you can't publish that." And I was like,
Yeah.
"But it says right here that they're found over there, and this is why." And they're like, "Okay, just change their name." So yeah,
Follow me.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I'll share all of
because
those links if you are interested in checking those out.
we
Now
can
move on to
vaguely
the
mention
lands.
Asherak without going into details.
Right.
On the Sourcing Vault, it's frustrating. We have Fenric open now, so we have 2 continents we can play with. So I'm gonna kind of do a not a super deep dive because I don't have much time, but I'm kind of do a high level dive into the regions of this. I've got the map up in front of me, of the various zones. You know, so everything is very theocracy based, like very religion is so much important in Asherak that just about all political power is fundamentally rooted in the clerics of the region. Clerics do everything. The god kings were blessed, and they're almost all of them have cleric levels. Everybody in Asherak has knowledge religion, or a point in or proficiency in religion. It's just like you get that for free because you were born here. It doesn't matter what your class is. Be a whatever, you have proficiency in religion. You can have an int of 7 and you have proficiency in religion. It just is a given. And everybody is like they see cleric magic, they can like, yeah, that's the bless spell. It's a first level spell. They will know. Like everybody will know. From the age of 6 upward, you just know what it is. So it's these regions are called they called them Theopolies post the Cataclysm. Actually even pre the Cataclysm they were Theopolies. But most of Asherak is now divided into city-states because there just isn't enough survivors for countries. But it's less that it's a pure city-state and more that they are the places where the power is held.
Mm-hmm.
And will be each city-state will be devoted to usually one or maybe a couple specific gods. And then there are some other communities outlying them, like farmlands and little hamlets and whatever. But there's so little land that's livable that they do tend to kind of cluster, at least in a region close to a city-state, with a couple of notable exceptions. So alphabetically, because that's the way it is in the book, I'm going to kind of wander around the map quickish, starting with the Anagara Theopoly. Remember I mentioned Theopolis. This is the island off of the east coast of Asherak. It didn't used to be an island. 150
Right.
years ago, or 200 years ago, it was part of the main continent. The only reason it survived was that the mountains at the edge of the sky pillars kind of survived to kind of hit the energy sort of bamped against them, protecting the land on the other side. But the land on the other side was a lot further out before, and what used to be kind of an inland river is now a beach property. And a lot of the land beyond that is just gone. And the bay that's on the other side of that was all land before, and mountain ranges, and now it's just a bay with a couple of islands. The Angara, lots of plant life died here because of the resulting cataclysm, and the region has slowly been developed, mostly because of the God King's magic, which saved people. And there's several city-states in this region. Madriel, one, there's one for Manawe, there's one where they fall in Nemorga. And there's actually a couple here with demigods rule. We talked about those in the way early episodes when we went over the demigods. But there's a library city devoted to the goddess Imatuk, who's pretty much not heard of anywhere outside of Asherak, or even really anywhere outside of this little city. And it's only 4,500 people who live there. It was once a druid city, so now it's kind of like Asherak's Lokiel, sort of. and their god king, alas, that Imhotep made, he died. That's interesting is they made the god kings right after the war, but they didn't like make new ones. So when a god king died, they didn't come back in and go, I make another one, I make a
Right.
replacement. They just made the first chunk of them, and that was it. So as they get slain, vacuum. They don't get killed, don't get filled. So might be an interesting campaign of like, let's convince the gods to come back and make new god kings.
Yeah.
So there's that island. Moving around again, I apologize for the alphabeticalness of it. The next one would be Arisha Jackham. Don't ask me about these names. I blame Joe. I have no idea who to blame. We're like 50 authors on this book. There's an island to the northeast of the continent. This was an island prior to the Cataclysm. So it actually fared probably the best post-Cataclysm, but it still has probably the most healthiest plant life, and is the lushest in terms of overall general area. But that doesn't really help it that much because the people there are kind of assholes. A lot of the Titan worshippers that remained in Asherak post, like, basically the Great War between the Clerics and the Druids and the Purge, fled here. So this area is one of the few areas that still has any Titan worshippers in Asherak. So they're kind of like, no, the rest of you are not allowed. And it's pretty barbarous and just kind of like a lawless region, or druidic region. But this is where you're going to find them if you're going to find any. Breath is a city of Breth, not breathing, is kind of where you find most of them. And then the north, there's a city-state of Stel Perilous, which was kind of a colony of one of the other city-states of Corian followers who are like, we're going to make a foothold in this place because the land doesn't suck. It's a very, very recent colony. They're trying to build up, but they're kind of dealing with the Titan followers there. And there's also an Oracle Sisterhood to Inkili in the southern end, which is that Ugara's place on that mountain. So I talked about oracles are like a big deal in Asherak. It's interesting culturally, they don't really differentiate it, isn't like, oh, they're, how we've said, like that kind of culture of Shelzars, sort of like Arabia or whatever. Asherak didn't ping it to anything. They didn't say, oh, it's sort of like Asia or sort of like Africa or whatever. They mention what people look like, but they give them a completely wide range. So it's like, they're dark skinned, they're olive skinned, they're white, they're pale skinned.
Yeah. I think if anything, there's like a clothing reference to like our like Saudi Arabia, because it's mostly desert, and so it just makes sense to wear similar clothing. Other than that, there isn't like a cultural thing. Yeah,
they have a lot of ziggurats. There's a lot of places with ziggurats, so I do have kind of a little South America vibe.
Yeah,
for that, but you couldn't, and I think it's good that you can't just peg Asherak to a specific human, Earth culture.
Yeah.
But as a result of that, it's like, oh, what are these people like? And there's so little in a description that you get a little piece of like what humans, because they created the human I don't call them sub races back then, where you get like usually a weapon proficiency and a description of like a stat change, the alt rules for that, just like they have with the heritages now.
Yeah.
And then a description of like things like eye color and hair color and temperament. And they're all across the map. So, and the weapons are all like, they get flails or broadswords or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's still very, very medieval fantasy core kind of, and I definitely still get that like European vibe of medieval fantasy European vibe. But they're kings and stuff. So Asherak is not known for democracy.
Truth. Yeah, they are a
no voting booths.
Theocracy. Yeah.
Theocracy. It's almost exclusively theocracy,
Yeah.
except for a couple of pockets. Okay, so that's that island. Moving on. We're going all over the place because of the silly alphabet, but Crown Mountains come next. They're all the way in the south. They protected the southern tip, what's called the Riverlands, from the gods' spine, from what happened, from the cataclysm, and they kind of guard the Soulburn Waste desert from the relative safety of the Riverlands. The really interesting place. This is about the only place I found any followers of Belsmith. Belsmith's only god king seems to be here, which they call a witch queen because it's Belsmith.
Right.
not a god king. And she rules in this little pocket called the Veil of Shadow, or Veil of Shadows, where she basically has like witches and blackguards and lycanthropes presumably and part fiends in that area.
Yeah.
It's like, this is mine.
Right.
We follow Belsmith. But they also protect the Riverlands from shit that comes out of the Soulburn Waste, and will cooperate if need be with the paladin folks of the nearby Crown Keep, which is the other kind of protecting area of the Southlands, which is led by clergy of Corian and Tannel, which is, I think, probably the only reason why, because the followers of Belsmith are like, well, they're all good, but at least they're not, all Corian. And they're not Madriel, so it's okay. They didn't put any Madrielites there, so if it means there's more people for us to kidnap and sacrifice, then that's good, and we'll keep them from letting the undead invade the region. So apparently they cooperate in some level, but for the most part, the Belsamites are like, fuck off, this is our area. So that's what's happening in Crown Mountains. Then continuing alphabetically, I apologize, it's so weird. There's the Crucible Lands up to the north. We talked about this already a little bit, where the Ubuntu live. It used to be the Desert of On. They now call it the Crucible Lands because of what happened. The cataclysm took this like kind of deserty, normal desert into a complete arid wasteland of misery and challenge. And this is where you'll find the bulk of the Ubuntu tribes, who believe they've been blessed by the Lawgiver, blessed by Hadrada, and this place. Hadrada came and specifically saved them. Like, they didn't follow him prior to the cataclysm, and he's like, oh, I'll run and they're like, you go north, I'll go south, and Hadrada's like, I'll go north, and he's like, oh, you people, I put you under a protection shell and so you don't die, and they forever after like, you saved us, yes, and he's there. They follow him now. It's like, screw Henrik, you. And since then they've kind of divided into clans. The descendants of the survivors. And Hadrada was like, he's the first one who's like, I'm gonna make you really powerful, and made like the first god king. Like, I'm gonna do this, and then their gods were like, that's a good idea. I'll do this over here. So he's like, you protect them, make water, stuff. Give you clerical powers so you can do this. But one of the other things to survive this region, I don't know how they survive, but they survive this region, are these colossal turtles. The only thing I could think of is they're like, giant wave of cataclysm is coming, and they just tucked into their shell. And then wave of energy came through, and they're like, peek their head out going, is it safe?
Right. So it's weird because it mentions in their entry that they showed up like after the Divine War.
Yeah.
But like,
maybe.
I feel like there's such a cultural part of the Ubuntu already that for me they should have existed longer in the desert, because it was already a desert, so you had these things, and maybe they're larger than they used to be, but maybe. Like I just totally feel like
maybe it was the cataclysm that turned normal turtles into colossal turtles. I don't know.
Right.
But there's these colossal turtles, and And what was wild is the Cataclysm basically took what was desert and there was oases and normal kind of, and blasted it from like kind of a simple arid desert to like deep Sahara, nothing. Not like the Haggard Hills where there was no bacteria, but still no water. I haven't talked about the Godspine Mounds yet, but there's no clouds. There is no rain in either the Crucible Lands or the Soulburn Waste. Nothing. But what's interesting with these, so all the oases were just basically dried up. But these colossal turtles, when they die, water, like kind of like the moisture farmers on Tatooine, water collects like into their shells, just sort of out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And these Ubuntu people, these tiny little skinny people, would create habitat, like use these shells as oases, as they can't really move them because they're so massive, and live in them. These abandoned turtle shells, and imagine the turtle shell is the size of like a large office building, not a large office building, but a moderately sized office building. So like a castle-sized turtle shell.
Right.
And these little people be like, we can live here, and they're scattered across the desert. And the ones that were the living turtles, the Ubuntu actually ride them and like have like almost entire villages, entire clans would ride on one of these turtles across the desert. It's wild. It's absolutely crazy. It's like the sandworms of Arrakis.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Except that the turtles are, I don't know if they're more or less dangerous than the sandworms of Arrakis.
I mean, the sandworms will come up and eat you, and the turtles are just like, leave me alone unless you get attacked, and then they're like, okay, then I'll eat you.
True. Yeah. So we've got the Ubuntu. You've got some followers of the god of the desert, Temul, who looks like a camel-headed humanoid. They kind of live around this region as well, and various tribal folks who just sort of eke out a really, really, really harsh existence. And a lot of followers of kind of what they call the desert gods. Subastis, Dashan, and Tukulti, and Ashemas, who I didn't think was a desert god, but they've got him listed too. He's a god of fate. There's people who also use the shell oases, and they kind of don't necessarily get along with the Ubuntu, so there's some conflict there.
Yeah, there's a big resource
Those
battle. Like even the Ubuntu fight each other when they're trying to like get one of those shells because it's important for survival, like the water and all of that stuff. So
so there is all that. And then let's see, moving on. That's the Crucible Lands. The Fertile Crescent is north of the Crucible Lands. This is one of the two areas on the continent itself that is survivable-ish.
Right.
Sort of survivable.
What's this green color?
What's this green color on the black and white map? I expect this map was once in color. Right. It is one of the rare green places. What's interesting about it though is, and I love it, is that there's these rivers that run through the place, and a lot of rivers.
Yeah.
And these rivers in the north specifically are absolutely pure, which I think is super cool. So I'm sure that one of the gods was like, blah, I bless this river, and I'm out. Just here you go. Good luck. And the rivers cannot be contaminated, cannot be polluted. If you were to put something in the river that could harm people, like a poison or just a dead body of an animal or whatever,
right?
Any substance that isn't just like, in beautiful water, bubbles up to the top like oil, and does not mix, refuses to mix with the water.
Yeah.
So like you could just scoop it out, and just sort of hovers, and as the water flows around it, it'll be like, yeah, there's a dead deer in the water. Just leave it, and it would flow around it, and the ichor, blood or whatever from the dead deer wouldn't get into the water.
Yeah.
or if somebody tried to contaminate the water and poison the village downstream, or somebody pooed in it, it just wouldn't contaminate the water. It's just completely pristine all the time. Clearly magic. So that's cool. But plant life can only grow right next to these rivers. So you're like within a mile or so of the river, it's really nice. You move out further away and it's
Right.
nasty again, and there's just nothing. So all of
And
civilization here is just hugging these rivers.
Yeah, and if you take the water out, that property
yeah.
goes away after a day. So it's like,
Yeah.
I would say, I would think people would be bottling this and shipping it, but I mean,
No.
you can. It just doesn't retain that quality, so it could go bad.
Yeah. So it lasts about a day, but which is more just evidence that some god or gods blessed the water and like, no,
Right.
here we go. And this area, one of the biggest areas of this is the Fertile Crescent, the Callian Confederation, mostly humans and elves. Tanel is incredibly strong presence in this region, so I point my finger at her for whoever blessed this river or these rivers, because there's several of them. But there's a lot of Tanelite followers here. And then there's that I mentioned before, that where is it on the map? Stel Talionius. I said there was a colony on the Arisha Jackham Island. So that colony is from that Stel city, which is a Corianite. Corian and Handrada and Chardun, actually. Which I was like, oh, okay, the lawful gods. All three of them are big in this metropolis. So it's not even like, they call it not even just a city-state, but a metropolis. Although population of 76,000. That's a metropolis? Okay.
I mean, on this continent it is.
On this continent. Like, what's the population of shells are? 1 million?
Something like that. Yeah, it's a lot.
So we don't even have 100,000 people here, but still, Asherak was decimated. Population is annihilated almost. Populations are very small. But this place doesn't have a god king. One of the few places that doesn't have a god king. They have a holy council of 3 priests, one for each of the lawful gods, lawful victor gods. And each morning, I love this. Each morning, because this city is not, it's on the end of the river, but at this point, the river's kind of gone into more swampland, so a lot of salt gets mixed in. So while the river water was pure, it's now salty, so it's not really potable anymore. Why did they build here? Because they have a bunch of clerics, and they built this reservoir, like kind of in a massive above ground swimming pool. And every morning, a whole mess of clerics go out there, cast Create Water, spend half their flippin' spell slots on Create Water to fill the reservoir for today's water for the people. And it's then sent in pipes and aqueducts to the rest of the city every day. Their dependency on cleric magic. Now, this is to me the ultimate of civic use of magic.
Right, totally. And can you imagine that being your job? You go out, you spend all your spell slots creating water, and you're done for the day.
You're done for the day.
Right?
Now you just spend the rest of the day praying.
Yeah.
Thank you, Corian, for giving me Create Water. So half of your spell slots are just Create Water. And they call it the Blessing of Sacred Waters ritual. Which is that's wild. That is wild. Why did you build here? But yeah. And then one of the what I consider one of the fucked up areas of the Fertile Crescent is this city called Tangle, great name, which is almost mostly elves, not exclusively elves, mostly elves, and several half-fiends. Good couple percent of the population are half-fiends. And they pretty close to the Three Sisters Mountains as well, which is the other area where Vangal has got a lot of influence. And Tangle is basically Vangal's town. And they're not nice people. they have these ziggurats. I mentioned there's ziggurats. This is one of the many places that has ziggurats. And they do sacrifices to Vengel on these cigarettes, and the blood flows and covers the steps
As one does.
the temples, as one does. And there are a bunch of pirates and bloodthirsty, ruthless folks follow Vengel. And they do have a god king called a name with way too many X's in it, or Brannan Ixix. I can't even say it. The Shatterer. I'm just gonna call him the Shatterer. And his Church of Shattered Souls. So that's great. I love it.
Or Branaxis.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, but although he rules as much as the various houses of Tangle who kind of fight each other for dominance in this area because there's a bunch of Angle followers, and that's what they do. Okay, it's kind of the and most of the rest of the area is Tangle worshippers. And there's a couple other places too, but I'm gonna move on because we don't have a lot of time. Going to the middle. So we're still in the alphabet here. The Godspine Mountains is what they now call what used to be called the Sky Pillar Mountains. They now call them the Godspine Mountains. Why they changed the name? I guess because they're not Sky Pillars anymore, because most of them are a lot smaller, other than Mount Nemul.
Yeah.
A lot smaller than they used to be. Mount Nemul is just as tall, but it is much skinnier.
Yeah.
And wildly, the pit around Nemul is 100 miles long. No one knows how deep it is. No one can even begin to go down there. The range, this mountain range, as I said, used to be massive. Now it's like a third or less of the size it used to be. And what's wild, I said that the deserts are never rain. It's because all of the precipitation in the region gets sucked into the mountains on either side of Mount Nemul. Like they just attract clouds. So it's almost always raining here.
Right.
And like people can we get that rain to come into the desert? And yet there's like none of the rain goes north or south. It all goes into the ocean, or possibly into the pit that's around Mount Nemul.
Yeah.
But none of it goes to the deserts, as like every speck of moisture just gets sucked back into these rain clouds that are just constantly covering the peaks. So when you look toward Mount Nemul from anywhere else in Asherak, it's just that whole area, the whole mountain range is just covered in clouds. You can't really see anything. You might see the tip of Mount Nemul rising above the clouds, if anything. We get that effect. I live in Washington State, and we have Mount Rainier, which is freaking Mount Doom to the south, and it you see that it's such a huge mountain that you'll see a cloud just kind of hit Mount Rainier on the side and just like break up around it, but you'll see the top of the mountain above the clouds. That's kind of what I imagine Mount Nemul, except bigger, much bigger, as a skinny spire rising to the sky beyond what anyone can even see. So I talked before about like there was a place before the war, or before the gods showed up, where these druids had their power base. The ruins of that still exist. Well, overthrown by the gods hundreds of years ago. The place still exists, but it's now overrun by monsters. No one lives there anymore. They mentioned goblins and arachne, Titan spawn live in like the caves near the ruins. They also mentioned Slytherin. And I was like, is that a typo?
Yeah.
Like an error? Because how the fuck would Slytherin have reached Asherak? The only thing I think of is like the way that we made up how they got to Fenrilik, which is like we made a gate and landed here.
Teleportation magic gone wrong.
Yeah.
Really big catapult. I don't know.
Slytherin get here. They're not even that old. Or maybe they were one of the Slytherin broods that got deliberately made, and the Titan was like, "Yo, come with me. We'll go fight this fight," and then just sort of abandoned them here. I don't know, but apparently there's a small colony of Slytherin here, so but they're Titan followers, so they're not the nice, redeemed, fuzzy, friendly kind, like my character in A Family Affair. So we've got that. And then we've gotten Mount Nemul itself, which is absolutely wild. This mountain is virtually unclimbable. No mortal has gone up of it since the war. Before the war, before the giant pit was made, there were people who lived on the lower slopes of it, and there was like a lot of temples, and it was just considered the most holy place ever, and followers of various gods would come here and and feel like there's monasteries and all this stuff. Really big deal. And the gods did evacuate them right before turning on the Seraphic Engine. So most of those followers, well, not necessarily survived because they might not have evacuated far enough, but many of them did. So there's these potentially ruins of some of these temples that weren't just sheared off when the cataclysm happened. Maybe at the bottom of the pit, I don't know, but potentially some ruins, places that were dug well into the mountain. But wildest part is anybody who actually approaches, somehow crosses the chasm, reaches the mountain, almost certainly via magic, because I think it's the only way you can get there. All divine casters, be it druid, cleric, paladin, if you have divine magic, every spell is maximized. So, but whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, every spell is maximized. So if you're going to have a fight between the holy paladins and the demons, everybody's throwing maximized spells at each other. So
right.
Better prepare to boost up your hit points. And also spell prep. So when you pray and get your spells, it only takes 15 minutes instead of an hour. There's that too. So that's kind of their rule set, and I think that interprets quite well into 5e. So moving on. So I don't have a ton of time. Where are we? The Ferras.
Actually, before you jump into that.
Oh, before I jump into that.
Just because there is this interesting
dichotomy.
Is there a thread? Well, there's this interesting dichotomy that happens in the mountains there. So there is an order of paladins called the Exemplars.
Oh yeah. I didn't even get into the prestige class in this book.
So their prestige class comes from the Player's Guide to Monks and Paladins, but essentially they set up their base in this cave that they built into a compound.
Oh yeah, I did skip the Exemplar retreat.
Yeah, exemplary retreat. Yeah, and the dichotomy is really interesting because these are like super gung-ho paladins for their god, right? Which is not really that different than normal paladins. However, in the monster section for Asherak, sorry, I want to find it real quick before I say this. They are called Nahim or something like that. There they are. Yep, Nahim. They're essentially these people who were trying to become these paladins, and at that moment, the cusp of accepting their god and being granted these powers, something went wrong. Like that leap of faith you have to take, they didn't. They were like, huh, and then just fell, and they become these really kind of crazy monks, where they have a lot of powers of monks, but they are mad. Like they have an aura of madness that leeches off of them, and they're not an anti-paladin, but they're not like a blackguard that fell from grace.
Yeah,
they're really a being that couldn't make the leap of faith to become, and so they, I guess you could still call it falling from grace, but they've become these. Oh, they're actually undead. I missed that earlier. So they're like cursed to be this way. That's really interesting. I just thought the dichotomy of like you have this area of these really spiritual and gung-ho paladins, and if somebody joins their order and fails, they become this cursed being, this like fallen paladin.
Yeah, it came from the exemplary retreat, where the actual paladins are, came from because I kind of skipped it. There was a city that I also haven't talked about yet in detail. Where was it? Brathanis.
Right.
I'm trying to find it on the map. I don't remember which zone Brathanis is. The city that city of Brathanis in the sky. Anyway.
So Brathanis fell, so I don't think it's on the map any longer.
Yeah, maybe it's not on the map. They say it used to be a city of Hadrada, and now it's in Keeley City. Anyway, they left that city to build this retreat, and the guy who rules it is called the Perfected One.
Yeah.
Which is just like, this is the only reference to him, and I'm like, wow, that is such a kind of a paladin-y monk.
Right.
But I also like that could be anything lawful.
Yeah.
Because it could be Turdoon. I mean, it just that's such a lawful kind of D&D lawful kind of title, the Perfected One. A little bit of arrogance there. It's like, I was like, is that a god king? And then I couldn't find anything about him. I was like,
right.
okay. So that's why I kind of glossed over that, because like that's just yet another piece of this, because there's just so much here. But yeah, apparently it was it was the Fertile Crescent. It's one of the cities in the Fertile Crescent. They fled it. And it got taken over by the followers of Inkili when they fled it, because Inkili would do that. Okay, moving on. Now I'm going to move to the other mountain range.
Yeah.
Parata Mountains, which is the mountains between the desert of On and the Fertile Crescent in the north. There's basically 3 big locations here. Well, 2 on the eastern side. There's 2 known large passes through this range between the Crucible Lands and the Crescent. And there's probably a bunch of little ones, but none of the rest are big enough to get a whole caravan through it. It'd just be like, kind of single file kind of stuff. It's just 2 major passes, and each of these passes has basically a trade city-state thing in the pass, guarding that pass. And they are as different as night and day. And wildly, the Ubuntu tribesmen of this region bounce between the 2 on a regular basis, which is crazy given how night and day these 2 cities are.
Right.
One is a majority dwarven called Altanthropolis. Yeah. It's a Hadradan Theopolis called the White Marbled City. Beautiful city, like perfectly constructed the way Hadrada would want. The people there are divided into castes. The top castes are the priests and the leaders, and they're mostly Ubuntu, followers of Hadrada. And then kind of moves from there as each class gets lower, and the Harati is the top class. The bottom class are called the Inkti. Tell me that's not Hadrada and Keeley, Right. The Enki is the bottom class, and they're considered those who are chaotic and lawless, and they get all the filthy work. So they're like the janitors and the poop collectors. And then in the middle you've got a bunch of other classes, like with the craftsmen and lore keepers and warriors all fit. One of which I think was really interesting clump of people that I thought was interesting, called the K-A-L-L-O Calorti. I want to say Calorti class. Cast. Those who work means they must touch blood. They plumped healers, morticians, and warriors and butchers into the same cast. And I was like, that's wild. That is a wild way of categorizing people. And what's the freakiest part, though, is that the priesthood, every kid that's born, they would go and examine the kid and be like, where do you belong? And figure out, like, you aren't according to divine will through the priesthood determines your caste. So you aren't automatically in a caste because of who your parents are, which I thought was kind of interesting. I think that's the intent here. Anyway, so that's the Hadrada city. And the other one is called Skaumaturge.
Skaumaturge, yep.
Skaumaturge. Mostly humans. These are followers of Otassel, the Bone Lord, one of the aspects of Namorga, the
Yeah.
evil, the really, really evil aspect of Namorga, god of death, or amalgamation of death. And this city is above the Pass of Jagged Bones, which is also on the edge of a volcano.
Yeah. Like, if you're gonna have an evil overlord, this would be his lair.
Yeah,
Or their
totally.
lair, right?
Their lair. It's just completely there. And there's tons of. It's like this is just a miserable place. There's undead, and it's like kind of a mini Holocaust in a way. And free-willed undead pretty much rule here. So I'm just picturing vampires and liches kind of just rule the show here. And then zombies and whatnot. Unfree-willed undead are the labor force. So it's like, what do the living do? and people are just parts, kind of like the worst elements of Holocaust. And they had a god king, Scamaturge, but he died. And then others have tried to take over, but they all kind of have just mega sucked. And there's this volcano here, and I have to scroll down to find the volcano, where there's this volcano here that the new guy who's not a god king but is trying to rule, has been the old god king had this throne above the volcano, and they would bring sacrifices and just talk to them. Okay, I'm talking about the right place, right? My notes are all over the place. And he was like, oh, I will watch this. And so the god king died, and they're like, oh, the new guy kind of took over, but he couldn't find the path to get to the throne that sits above the volcano. So he couldn't watch the sacrifices. So he's like, so everybody thinks he's lesser. They're like, you're not the real ruler. You're not even sitting on the throne. And he's like, I don't even want to get to the throne. So he's just like looking up down where they're doing the sacrifices at the throne that's up there. Like, how do you get there? So I kind of love that. And there's all this concern, because there's also this group of tribesmen in the same area who follow the demigod Subastis, who's like the god of the gods of the desert, and they're like, that volcano is ours, because Subastis is a god of fire,
Right.
and they're like, no, that belongs to us. So the new lord of this city is like really nervous that they're going to try to take over his great sacrificey volcano place. So that's wild. The volcano is Balathu. So I kind of love that.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then the other place on the other side of kind of the bay there and the crescent is the Three Sisters Mountains, which we alluded to already. Three god queens, or witch queen, or god, I guess just god queens, all followers of Vangal, and just barbaric, crazy ladies
Right.
who all have a following and who just go to war with each other.
Right.
And everybody's like, just don't go there. Don't go through those three mountains.
Is such a great triumvirate of worship of Vangal, because he doesn't get his power from worship, he gets it from fighting. And so he created these three, and they don't get along, they fight each other, and he's just like, yes.
Yeah. And they're all jealous of each other because they think Vangal likes the other two better.
Right? Which I'm sure he does not. He does nothing to belay that. He's just like, yes, I absolutely feel that.
Yes. So they're always kind of fighting. And everybody else is like, we're just, there's a few very, very brave traders who are like, we have things if you would like them. And that's about, no one else even goes near this place. Like, bad news. So that's the Three Sisters Mountain. Where was I? I'm scrolling back around. And then
Riverlands?
I think we go to the Riverlands, which is, I think, one of probably the most interesting region of all of these places. Like the north, it was also protected by the mountains, and more people survived. They were also communities hugging rivers, and while the rivers aren't blessed in the way that the Crescent is,
Mm-hmm.
they still kind of where the best plants and everything can live. More rivers, even more rivers here, and even more little city-states. But this place is more broken up into sort of 3 separate kingdoms, so to speak, and a couple of independent locations. And this is all because of one dickhead. One guess what god he follows. Who's the most
there's so many dicky gods, though.
But there's one god who's really big on expansion and expansionism, and really big on spreading out. And all of the history, post-war history of the Riverlands is about this problem. So the Empire of Kanesh, which is, I'm looking closer at the map, which is on the kind of the, I can't even find it. Yeah, on the far eastern part of it, Kaneshopolis, but right on the edge of the mountains. Followers of Chardoon, the lawful evil god of slaver god who just likes conquering everything. His god king was like, I want more. Like you do.
Of course you do, right?
Yeah. So like just a few years into his like 30 years after the Divine War, he's like, all right, everybody's alive now, and we've built things, and we've reestablished civilization, and we're not starving anymore. Let's go conquer. And he starts by kind of looking around, going, who's weak?
Just start at the bottom and work our way up.
Work our way up. Yeah. So they just kind of go out and just start going and conquering things. First starts at a Vangalite city of all places. Like, you think, why would you really want to mess with the Vangal followers? But Vangal doesn't give a shit. So yeah, Vangal made a god king. He's like, okay, he's a god king. Good luck. But then he just sort of fucks off. Yeah. He's not sending demons there to help them like all the other gods are. He just doesn't give a shit. So they're like, we'll go there. So he goes there, overthrows the god king, and goes, Vangal didn't help him. Chardoon will help you. And then the people were like, but Vangal just knows that you're more badass, and we still follow Vangal. So he's like, I can work with that. So there's like this Chardoon god king who's got all these Vangal followers, barbarian hordes of people who are just like, sure, we'll fight for you. We get to kill things? Great. So they're basically we're fine. We didn't need a god king. We'll follow you. Sure, whatever. We get to kill people. So that's kind of their thing. And so he's got these Vangalite crazy guys who are his ground troops to go after the next city-state. And he just starts conquering his way like a really fucked up risk game around the Riverlands, going after the Corianites and the Madrialites, and just sort of trying to sweep his way through the area. So, and he manages to conquer a Corian city, 2 Corian cities in the area, leaving 1 Corian city left, looking very sad. And the main defenses, basically the other groups rallied around and created their own confederations just to defend themselves from these guys, because that's like multiple city-states aligned. We need to defend ourselves. So first was the nations of what was called the Andorra Federation, which is the ones on the far west. They follow Hadrada and Madriel mostly, and they're like, okay, we got to kind of create an alliance together. And my favorite, and I know Joe Karkar had a big hand in writing this, I guarantee it. If he did not, I'm disappointed. I'm sure this was like his idea. My favorite was the Galician Moor city-state, ruled by the god king Galician, who finally, like, through just badassery, in like, I challenge you to a duel, kills Kanesh, the Chardoon god king. And this is like after Kanesh has knocked off like 4 other god kings. So like just god kings killing each other right and left. And he gathers his forces and manages to kill him. This is after his neighboring god king was murdered, and just everything after they made their little confederation. And this guy runs his soldiers are called the Legion of Stone, which I think is awesome. And the way they're set up is they're paired, same-sex pairing partners in this legion, where it's two people in pairs, and these two people are effectively married. So, this was written to this before, but they called them basically gay lovers or same-sex lovers as a partnership within the military, all led by Galashan and his partner Barrelin, who's an elf. So, which is about the only race that is long lived enough to be married to a god king who are immortal. So,
fair.
So they're together. And they've got all these troops, and the way it generally works is they're so devoted, each pair is so devoted to each other, if one of them falls in combat, the other one just goes ballistic and just goes rabid and leaps into the fray of battle, basically sacrificing themselves to kill as many foes as they can, because their partner or spouse has just been killed. So they are incredibly devoted in that regard, and I thought that was nice. And this is one of the positive, I guess, explicit mentions of LGBT characters in these early books. So it's like, hey, gay people. I had a little joyful cry at that point. Nice. So I don't know who wrote this, but whoever it is, thank you. Any representation is appreciated. And this felt like more of a positive one than the Calastian ruler who no one liked. There you go. But in any case, Galashan was wounded, apparently, and while he didn't die, he's kind of messed up and not doing so well, and there's concern that he could die. And his partner, the elf, they'll be like, he'll totally just throw himself off a cliff if the God King ever died.
If they're not like in battle.
Yeah.
Otherwise he'd be like, rah! Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then his sister is a god queen in her own right, follower of Madriel in one of the neighboring city-states. But she died too during one of these battles. So it's like really sad, because like I said, these god kings are just dropping left and right, and there's
so much drama.
Well, there was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There was like 9 or 10 of them, maybe up to a dozen of them down here, and there's like 3 left. They've just been duking it out. 3 or 4.
The bane of being immortal.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to kill you.
And the final group is the Shining Empire, which sort of sits in the middle of this madness, which is where all the Corian followers are. And that was 3 Corian city-states, one of which is now part of the Chardonites. And there's only one God King left alive amongst them, who's a very sad individual, because he's like, I am alone. There's the gay guy over there, but he follows Hadrada, and it's just me. He's really sad because all the other ones are dead. And one of the God Kings that died from in that area, in the Shining Empire, and they didn't want to be an empire. They're like, we just have to be an empire because we have to guard ourselves from these crazy conquerors. This other guy was assassinated by Kinesh, the leader of the bad guys, but they didn't let out that he died. I love this one. So he was this oracle. Again, oracle's apparently big here. There's this oracle who would spend all of his time sitting in front of his crystal ball on his throne or whatever in his room, sitting in front of his crystal ball and telling everybody what's going to happen and directing through. So he'd be like, go there, and he'd be looking at the crystal ball. So he gets stabbed or something. Ganesh sneaks into his room, stabs him or something. We don't know how he died, but they find the body, and they're like, he's just asleep. And they whether they cast a spell on him or he just didn't decay, they dress him up in his robes, stick him in his chair, put the globe there, and it's like, he's just asleep while he's looking in his crystal ball.
Weekend at Bernie's.
We're just waiting for him to wake up. weekend at Bernie's indeed. He'll wake up someday.
Right.
He just needs some rest. Maybe after they overthrow Kanish, everything will be fine. And they did recently finally overthrow Kanish. But his wife took over. She's not a god queen or a god king, but she's badass. So she's still like ravaging, and they're all like, "Oh, it'll be fine. We killed Kanish. We're good. We can." I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. It's gonna be okay. There'll be peace in the Riverlands again. But no, she's still ruling with an iron fist, devout. She's got fiends on her side and Vangalites and all that stuff. So the threat is far from gone. So this whole thing in the Riverlands is still upheaval. The very last location, the one city-state did not join any of these empires, is Hatanu, mostly human city of Madrialites. They don't have a god king. They don't need one, because they have crocodiles.
Right.
I forgot to tell you to grab the crocodile art. I don't know if you grabbed the crocodile art.
I didn't. That's all right, though.
So they during the Divine War, the city was attacked by Titan spawn, and Madriel sent these crocodiles to go defend the people.
Yeah.
And they rose up out of the river and defended the temple of Madriel there. And so people started not really worshiping these crocodiles, but certainly like sacrificing to them and being really nice to them. And they would bring them. They'd be like, "Well, we don't want to bring them people because that's horrible because we're Madrielites. So we'll bring them food and And they're like, bring them food, but they don't eat. They eat fish. They don't eat berries that we eat. So we'll bring them jewelry." So they started bringing these like crowns and necklaces and stuff to these crocodiles. Yeah. So there's these crocodiles that have like human level intelligence wearing jewelry.
Yeah.
In the river guarding this city. And they're called Paragon Crocodiles, and they're just great.
And so, in 3rd edition, like in Scoured Lands, there were the Paragon Creatures. It was a template you could put on. And essentially, so you had like normal creatures, dire creatures, Paragon creatures. So like as far as power level. So these aren't just like crocodiles. They're like super powerful, intelligent crocodiles. Yeah.
So finally, that's the Riverlands. I know I've only got a couple minutes left, so I want to quickly talk about the rest. The Shard Islands, which are on the west coast, off of the Godspine Mountains, bits of mountain tips, basically tough reefs, really difficult to navigate. Lots of sea traffic runs through this region going from the north end to the south end. But not much here. There's one place of note, which is the island or the tribe of Urku on one of the islands, is devout followers of Manawi, who she rescued, and they're 100% clerics. They're a tribe of almost exclusively human, all clerics. Like, you are born, you are made into a cleric.
You are born with the holy symbol in your hand.
And you become a cleric of Manawi.
It's really painful coming out.
Yes. So she saved them when the cataclysm occurred, and they were literally as this monastery on Mount Nemul. And they were like, "Oh crap!" And she's like, and they had evacuated, but they were still in the mountains, and the cataclysm happened, and their mountain is falling underneath their feet, and she sweeps them up, and she's like, "I will hold on to you, okay, blook." Like, "You're safe now." And they're like, "Thank you, we will follow you forever." And now they're all devoted to her. And when they are gonna die, like from old age or disease or whatever, they throw themselves into the sea and sacrifice to Manawi. So I that's a fun little group there.
Yeah.
The other side of the mountains on the other coast, on the east coast, there's the Shield Bay, which is a bunch of other kind of islands of these used to be mountains as well.
Right.
And this one, the location of interest is called the Island of Griat. And unless you live on the Island of Griat, you have no idea which island is the Island of Griat. Because they will fuck with you. And they will set up campfires on all the islands, so you don't know which. Is like, go to the one with the fire. They all have fires. We don't know which one, or it moves, or it's not clear. But it's a
Right.
pirate haven, basically. That yes, there are pirates in this area, and then we've got to have a Tortuga on every continent of Skarn,
Right.
and this is the one that's on Asherak. So, and they also use magic in various ways to keep the authorities of the Theopolies from messing with them. And then so there's that. And then I haven't talked about the Soulburn Waste yet, although you kind of touched upon it briefly. That's where the souls. This is where the big kingdom was before before the war. I don't even think it was an island. It was a desert at the time. And when the Seraphic Engine blew, the souls were destroyed, and the energy from those souls were like imbued into the ground. This place is a land of wild magic. Like, good luck casting spells here, and undead throughout the area. It makes the Crucible Lands look like a beach.
Right.
It is so nasty, and yet people have been trying to build on it, and you do have Canad Varsis on the far east coast, human dwarven Tardonite city. Because they're Chardonites, so of course they survived, right? And again, they're kind of remind me of a little bit of that Hadradad city of the Ubuntu, where the castes.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys are even worse. like the other one was like, oh, the clergy determine which caste you're going to be in, based on this. These guys are similar,
right?
And the clergy rule the show, and they determine what your job will be. But this is like Nazism to the nth degree, where you're indoctrinated at infancy. The clergy control everything in everybody's lives. There's no slavery here because they don't need it. There's no subjugation of the population here because they don't need to, because everybody is completely obedient. Because anybody who shows disobedience or snipped in the bud before they're even allowed to, and they use like mind control and brainwashing, and they've had 100 years of practice at this thing, and they're so isolated because they're surrounded on three sides by the Soulburn Waste that nobody can really go in and do anything about this.
And it's one of those places where I find it super creepy because it's I feel like I think the right term is Stepford wives, like it, even though like all of this horrific stuff happens, it's so downtrodden that when you go into the city as an outsider, it seems almost serene, like everyone's like doing exactly as they should, and like and it's not like when you hear about it, you're just like, oh my gosh, it must be like this terrible place, but it isn't. And so you're just like, well, what's right? So what's wrong with this place? And it's like all of it's kind of terrifying where it's like this more subversive thing than in your face. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's no slums. There's no poverty. There's no freedom.
Right.
They tell you who you're going to marry. They tell you how many kids you're going to have. They tell you everything. They tell you how much you can sell your products for. They tell you, they watch your children as they're playing, and then based on how they play, determine what job they will have as an adult.
Right. So it's as a person, you'd have to decide what's more important to me: the freedom to do what I want, or this like really strong sense of security and safety that this offers me. You know what I mean? That's so creepy to me.
And you kind of wonder, if there's corruption high level in this place, what it means.
Right.
So really creepy place.
Yeah.
I would not, as clean as it sounds, I would not want to go there. So and they claim that this city, the White Acropolis, has more thoroughly and universally devoted to Chardoon than anywhere on Skarn. More so than Calastia, more so than the Chardonite dwarves who were made by him. As 51,000 people are completely devoted, or claim to be at least,
right,
devoted to Chardoon. So, poof! Wow, that's a thing. Yeah. So I think I covered all the major places.
Yeah. I think
Also
the
in the Soulburn Waste, there's some tribes that eke out a sad little existence. Um, but yeah.
I think
Um,
the only other important part to mention are the Rack
I
Elves.
was about to say, I was literally looking at the word
Yeah.
Rock Elves when you said that. I was like, there are the Rock Elves. Um, they wander the Soulburn Waste, devoted to Subastis and the Flayed God. Didn't talk about the Flayed God. So one of the gods who was a demigod, but they don't know who the heck he was
Yeah.
because he was almost completely destroyed by the destruction of the engine, and he's just this like wreck of a creature now. And they're like, could he have been one of the gods that we don't know what happened to? Because there was a good half a dozen demigods that just sort of died during the destruction of the engine, and they're never named. They're just sort of vaguely
Yeah.
waved at. And they don't know which one he was. He is so messed up. He doesn't even know who he was before this.
Right.
And he's like tortured soul, poor fella,
I feel
but
like
his
he's the guy who
followers.
threw himself in the grenade once they realized it was going to go wrong. He's like, no, and he survived, but
But
damn.
yeah, and so his followers are like all about pain, and these elves were hit by the engine, and they became Rock Elves, which are just weird.
Yeah.
I have to go back to the top of my notes for them, but
Like it talks about how like the elves of the world are like really tied to the land, and with the twisting of the land, it twisted this race of elves that lived there, and like they're scarred, their limbs are like kind of jinky, you know what I mean? Like they're not these beautiful creatures that people expect when they see elves. These are like
oh,
fucked up elves.
yeah, I don't know if you've got a picture of one of the Rock Elves, but then their culture was destroyed. It's completely devastated. So, but because they're so tied into the land,
Mm-hmm.
they have an ability to identify places of power,
Yeah.
just kind of like by walking through the region. So they were a playable race in like the Ubuntu in 3.5. So
Yeah.
another potential playable race, maybe for
They're
Skyline
they're
someday.
also in the play Scarred Races guide.
Ah, okay. They're
Um,
also buried in there
and
with a different name.
no, they're actually Rack Elves. They
Cool.
let me get
Okay.
away with that
Okay.
because it does talk about like this is the main place, but there are other places where Rack Elves did show up.
Oh, makes sense.
You know, like Elspad, like the places that were forests that just got scoured.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
elves that
Like
were there became Rack Elves, right?
the Keldar Steppes, perhaps, or
Yeah,
any of these other nasty places on the map behind my head.
and places of power is kind of important where it's not really talked about a lot. Um, we haven't talked about it a lot,
No,
and
we
they're
haven't.
they're like areas that magic and energy exist in stronger concentrations, and essentially these elves can tell that and then use that ability to enhance their spell casting.
Yeah, and they're wild, and they do like serpent holds and area of not 51, but some other number in Lokiel, 34. I don't remember what it's called. Um, and
Area
those
51 of Skarn, right?
are smart. Although different kinds of places of power, where either a Titan had stronghold or something major happened,
Right.
and pockets of energy. I mean, and Mount Nemul is the ultimate place of power on Skarn.
Yeah.
So, and these Rock Elves live nearby. But yeah, just wild stuff. So much.
Yeah.
It gets me as, and I know we haven't touched on Asherak as a place to run because A, there's not a lot of info in it, and B, there's so much in Gelspad. Like,
Right.
why bother? But it answers a lot of those questions, like where did the gods come from? Where did the humans come from? So it kind of is that filler
Right.
location of all of that. Oh, and there was one place I didn't mention, which is a rather silly place, the Rose Waters.
Oh yeah.
On the map, if you stand in a very high place, presumably on top of one of the Godspine peaks, and you look to the west,
Right.
over the horizon,
With
where
just
the
the right
sky
light.
just the right light, the sky will be red, and there will be sort of a reflection where that shouldn't be red, and it is, and that's the Blood Sea over the
Right.
horizon. And they know it. They know it exists. I mean, not everybody knows it exists. Like they know of things in Asherak. It's not like, oh, we know about divine magic. Like, but
Right.
enough people, enough sailors know. You go, and it's a threat because as the
Yeah.
Blood Sea grows, it could be in another 100 years it'll reach Asherak.
Yeah.
If it continues to grow.
For me, it's a great plot point because you don't want that shit getting to your shores. In fact, even though the waters in between aren't red, they probably still have essence. You know what I mean? Just like because it's the ocean and there's currents that are under there that are like probably pulling Guk to the waters around Asherak. For some high level campaign to be like, you need to go out and stop this shit because I don't want to drink that.
Yeah. So how would you stop the spread of the Blood
Right.
Sea?
Right.
That's a wild. Well, I mean, the number of PCs I've had is like, I'm going to make it my mission to purify the waters of the Blood Sea. And then they get to the shore and they go,
never mind.
Purify what food and drink. Purify food and drink. Purify. I could cast this spell for every spell slot every day the rest of my life and not make a dent.
Just not going to do it.
No, it's not going to do it. So, yeah. And there you go. So just wild. Yeah. So I have played around with Asherak. I've had PCs from Asherak, and there is trade between Asherak and the other continents. Not a lot, but it does exist. People are aware that it exists, and obviously there was a migration thousands of years ago from Asherak to brought the humans, the elves, and the dwarves to the other parts of Scar.
I mean, at that point, there wasn't a giant blood sea in between.
There wasn't a giant blood ocean in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm interested that off the east coast of Asherak is the Eternal Waters.
Yeah.
How big is this planet?
Right. Well, when we talked off camera about this, the map and like how jinky it was, like how long it would take to get to every place, and if you weren't watching last week when we were talking about,
I complained about the map.
Right, about the Blood Sea and everything. Yeah. Maybe the world is that huge. Like maybe it is like a 10 times Earth thing with Earth-sized masses on it, where they're just like lost in these oceans of foreverness. You know what I mean? And only this little bit exists.
But that makes trade between the continents just unfeasible.
I mean,
really,
well, I mean, if they're all on the same side of the planet and the rest of it's just water, which would be
that explains
weird.
Why you can't go
right,
west from Galescad or east from Asherak, but because the planet's not supposed to be flat. It's not a disc world with Mount Nemul in the middle. As much as it's not a disc world. So they said it in multiple places. It's not a disc world. So that's interesting. But yeah, there you go. Anyway, it's late and we got to wrap this up. So who the hell are you? Or who the hell am I?
Let's go with who the hell are you first.
Well, I'm Sarah Stewart. I wrote some books for the Scoured Lands, mostly not as an employee of Onyx Path Publishing, but as a freelancer. And you can find Vigilant through Shadows and Dreams Book 1 and a whole bunch of other books, RPG supplements up on Drive-Thru RPG. And Vigilant's available on Amazon and wherever fine ebooks are sold. You can find a full listing of everything I've done on my website at morelikethisindustries.com. You could find me on Mondays on Travis Legg's game on Plastic Age Plays and the Onyx Path Twitch channels. Not this month, in the Family Affair. Not this month, but maybe I'll be back in May. I don't know yet. It's gonna depend on my schedule, and my schedule has gotten really tight. So this might be my last Lore You Know for a while, until things.
Adulting is the worst.
Adulting, yes. COVID is coming to an end for me, and I actually have to start commuting to work again soon. So I have to go be an adult and not be able to play all day, and that sucks. Well, not that I was playing all day, but I wasn't. But this is going to be harder for me to do. So
yeah,
you'll probably be seeing less of me for a while. I know, it's very sad. I don't want to go because this is the best. But I'll pop in when I can.
Yeah.
I'll say that. And hopefully we can touch on Termana sometime in the future.
Yeah.
I don't want this to end. Maybe just a break. I don't know.
I'm definitely hoping that they decide to announce like a Termana guide or something like that, and then open it up for 5th edition creation on Solution Vault, so that it's a little more like thematically purposeful for us to do lore, because like
Yeah.
you could run stuff in 3rd edition for it, or you can take the time to update it for 5th edition yourself. But right now there's nothing to it that's accessible. So
Yeah, can't write for it. So.
But we do hope that work goes well for you.
Thank you. Yes, I do have the day job. I wish I do not talk about it here.
For real life.
But, yeah, I don't make my living as an RPG writer. I wish I could, but
right?
No, I don't. I have the day job. I do have a career that's been a little stagnant during COVID, but not going to be much longer. So I got my first shot. So the second one's coming soon. And
nice.
Life
Hooray.
goes back to
normal,
right?
Which you haven't got your shot. Make sure you get signed up.
Get your shot.
Go get your vaccine.
Hands,
right?
Wear a mask.
Do all the things to take care of yourself and your fellow people.
Yeah. Do that. And
go ahead.
I will miss everybody.
We'll miss you.
I won't be far. You can still find me on my website. You can still find me on Discord. So
nice.
Yeah.
And I'm Jeremy Hochhalter. You can find me here on Twitch at WH Publications. Same as on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter at WH Pubs. I also publish stuff on Drive Through RPG and DM's Guild. I will post links to both Sarah and mine stuff in the show notes. And we appreciate you joining us. You all have a great day, and we'll see you sometime soon. Bye.